you think Itachi was wrong? Yeah, I mean, every powerful jutsu's gotta have a weakness, right? But at least that statement only applied during the Shippuden era. Because honestly, whether that statement is still relevant or not in the Boruto era, let's take a moment to talk about a power known as Shinjutsu. I'm Nim, without an E, and I really appreciate all of you who keep supporting me by liking every one of my videos. Once again, thank you so much, guys. So yeah, first of all, I honestly don't know if you've already heard about this topic or not, but I'm pretty sure it's still interesting enough to talk about because this actually connects to Daemon. And as we know, chapter 27 might be the real proof, or maybe even another unexpected plot twist, just like always. Yeah, I think you know what I mean, especially when it comes to Sarada and Daemon. Now, back to the main topic. When it comes to Shinjutsu, technically, there were already techniques in the Naruto Shippuden era that could be considered Shinjutsu. However, the term Shinjutsu itself was only truly introduced and clearly explained in the Boruto era, especially after the appearance of the Otsutsuki clan and the concept of divine power that was explored in more depth. But if we look closely at the definition of Shinjutsu, which is a divine technique that originates directly from the power of the Otsutsuki, or the energy of the god tree, Shinju, then yes, there were already a few examples of this kind of technique back in Naruto's era. At least from what I know, there are several techniques in the Naruto era that could fall under the category of Shinjutsu. One example is the Infinite Tsukuyomi, or Mugen Tsukuyomi, a divine technique used by Kaguya Otsutsuki and also Madara, after they both gained the power of the god tree. By using the Rinne Sharingan, this ability reflects the light of the moon to trap all of humanity inside an endless genjutsu. Aside from that, the most legendary examples are the powers of Kaguya and Hagoromo, the Six Paths Senjutsu. Basically, Hagoromo, also known as the Sage of Six Paths, possessed Shinjutsu-level powers. He was the very first human to receive chakra directly from the Shinju. One of his divine techniques was the god-tier version of Chibaku Tensei, and even his ability to create entire dimensions can also be categorized as Shinjutsu, even though it wasn't explicitly called that back then. And of course, there were still many more Shinjutsu-like abilities in Naruto's era. But in Boruto's era, Shinjutsu is explained in much greater detail, right? However, if we return to the main topic, especially regarding Itachi's statement that every jutsu has a weakness, does that apply to Shinjutsu? Yeah, we'll conclude this at the end. However, if we look at the existence of Shinjutsu, one of which is the omnipotence possessed by Eida to alter human memories of reality, fundamentally and factually, Eida cannot control that power. Because if we go back to the omnipotence arc, Momoshiki explained that Eida cannot activate it based on her own will. Because in fact, that ability is activated through Kawaki's own desire. But does that mean we can conclude that it is a weakness? Or, since omnipotence is currently only possessed by Eida, a cyborg, does that mean if a pure Otsutsuki possessed omnipotent abilities, they could activate them at will? So at this point, we actually cannot conclude whether this Shinjutsu has weaknesses or not. But what about Senrigan? Is the ability of the Dojutsu Eye a Shinjutsu? Because as we all know, the Senrigan Eye allows Eida to see the whole world and the past even before her birth. This ability cannot be explained by ordinary jutsu. Even Amado refers to Eida's power as Shinjutsu-level abilities. However, one thing is certain, the Senrigan is very likely a form of Shinjutsu, or at least a power derived from the Otsutsuki Shinjutsu that is genetically inherited. In other words, it hasn't been officially confirmed, but conceptually and biologically, the Senrigan can be categorized as Shinjutsu, right? But if we return to the main topic of whether this ability has weaknesses or not, the answer is actually the same as before. I mean, since Senrigan is basically only possessed by Eida, a cyborg, does that mean that if pure Otsutsuki possessed Senrigan eyes, they would have no limitations? Yeah, you know what I mean, right? Eida can only see the past up until the moment she was born. That means that long before she was born, Eida couldn't see some of the possibilities that happened in the past before she was actually born into this world. However, again, at this point we cannot conclude that this is a weakness of the Shinjutsu itself, but rather a weakness of Eida herself. Because of course, with evidence that Mamushi alone can interfere or distract Eida when she is seeing with her Senrigan, this is absolute proof that this is basically a weakness of Eida herself. However, based on the fact that Shinjutsu is considered weak because it is basically possessed by cyborgs, can we conclude the same for other cyborgs? I mean like Koji, Kawaki, Code, and even Daemon. Yeah, you guys surely know that they each have Shinjutsu with extraordinary abilities that are certainly different from one another. Kashin Koji with Jippo has a prediction of the future. Although there are some things we know, as explained in chapter 13, with several possibilities, such as the destruction of the world or Ishiki successfully reincarnating in Kawaki's body and Naruto dying, none of that actually happened completely. There are several divine interventions that make the prophecy not entirely consistent with Jippo's vision. But of course, behind all that, there are some things that are basically consistent with Jippo's vision, such as Jubi evolving into a divine tree human and several other things. But again, does Jippo's absolute accuracy only apply if possessed by the Otsutsuki god himself? In other words, if possessed only by a cyborg who does not have Otsutsuki blood, then they cannot inherit the power of Shinjutsu perfectly. Yeah, based on other things, this does need to be considered. But so far, only Daemon has not been fully revealed. Because if we talk about the last cyborg before Daemon, namely Code, one of his Shinjutsu has a weakness. Yep, the claw mark. So far, the only thing that can remove the claw mark created by Code is Kawaki's eye ability. By shrinking an object, Kawaki can prevent Code from moving using that claw mark. And again, is this just a coincidence? I mean, is it because Code is essentially a vessel with failed white karma and also a cyborg that his claw mark ability cannot maintain its existence, or at least not be destroyed or disappear just by Ishiki's inherited ability to shrink objects? Yeah, what do you guys think? And finally, the Daemon. I don't think I need to explain this in too much detail because I'm sure you all know how overpowered this reflection Shinjutsu is. But I call it the Shinjutsu of killing without touching. Yeah, that's how it is. However, I don't know if this can be considered a weakness or not, but what about the limitations of the activation conditions? In other words, we know that Daemon Reflection is only active if the opponent's attack is accompanied by the intent to kill. This means that if someone attacks without the intent to kill, for example, attacking to restrain, seal, or trap, will the reflection not activate? Because basically all humans on this earth who have reason will always have an intent before actually acting. Is that right? Whether it is good or bad, it all starts with intention. But what if the person only wants to seal or trap? For example, let's assume that Itachi or Sarada wants to trap Daemon in a genjutsu illusion, where Daemon's body is stabbed by a sword or other sharp object, like Itachi did to Kakashi. With this reflex ability, can Daemon reflex it? That means the person who should have been stabbed is Daemon, but because of his ability, it is Sarada herself instead? Yeah, this is just simple logic, but what do you think? However, this answer has two possible outcomes. That is, if the answer is that the demon can reflect and reverse the situation, then its reflection Shinjutsu remains at a point where there are no weaknesses. But if the opposite is true, where the Daemon is trapped in the genjutsu illusion, then it's the same as in the beginning. What I mean is, no matter how strong and powerful the Shinjutsu is, if it's used by a cyborg, there will always be a weakness. However, in conclusion, whether Shinjutsu fundamentally has weaknesses or not is still controversial. But based on the analysis explained earlier, for some reason, since Shinjutsu was introduced in the Boruto era through the god Shibai Otsutsuki, I feel that Shinjutsu doesn't really have any weaknesses yet. But for now, that's just how it is, because surely there will be many scenarios or plot twists that'll eventually reveal that Shinjutsu actually has its own weaknesses. I mean, so far, the Shinjutsu we've seen since the Naruto era didn't really have weaknesses. It was more like the main character's plot armor. Yeah, you know what I mean, right? But anyway, whatever your thoughts and opinions are, let's talk about it in the comments. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Nim, without an E, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye, Dadabayo.